Wel, croeso I Cynulliad Cenedlaethol Cymru ac y Pired Heno. Diolch yn fawr am ddod. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you here to the Pier Head tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rosemary Butler and have the great privilege of being the presiding officer here at the Assembly. I'm particularly pleased this evening to welcome Lord Hall and Lord Patten to the National Assembly for Wales. I understand it's very unusual to get you both in the same room outside London, so we do appreciate it very much. Now, their attendance here tonight, and their agreement to take part in a scrutiny session with the Assembly's Communities, Equality and Local Government Committee tomorrow clearly demonstrates a commitment to continuing the BBC's central role in Welsh civic and cultural life. Now, tonight we celebrate the commitment and contribution made by the BBC at a network level, and in particular by BBC Wales since it was established 50 years ago. However, I have been a critical friend over the last couple of years, and I'm only critical because I recognise the essential role that the BBC must play in ensuring that my work and the work of my other colleagues here at the National Assembly is properly scrutinised and reported. UK media institutions, including the BBC, have, I believe, struggled with devolution in terms of ensuring that fundamental policy differences in public policy approaches in Wales are properly reported to Welsh audiences, that which I have been calling the democratic deficit. Now, the BBC has responded positively to criticism on this issue by making it clearer that certain stories about schools and hospitals only apply to England. But I believe there is still a long way to go. Now, Wales was badly affected recently during the severe flooding, but reports on the BBC Network News continually referred to the Environment Agency, what the Environment Agency was doing to tackle the floods. Well, however, as we know here, Wales's environment body is called Natural Resources Wales, an error that could prove very confusing to BBC's Welsh audiences, and an error that is perhaps another example of the BBC failing to give Wales proper attention. Now, while recently on Question Time, the edition which came from Newport, there was only one panellist from Wales. Neither the Welsh Government nor the National Assembly for Wales were represented. There was only one issue discussed that was primarily Welsh, and there appeared to be widespread confusion among the panellists of the difference between the Welsh Assembly and the Welsh Government. Would this happen in Northern Ireland or Scotland, or even a region of England for that matter? I doubt it very much. Now, Welsh viewers pay the licence fee the same as everyone else in the UK, but there is a perception that we are often shortchanged. Perhaps part of the problem is that Wales doesn't have a strong enough voice on the institution that governs the BBC, and that's the BBC Trust. That situation, I believe, should be addressed through the establishment of a devolved governance body within the UK Trust framework, as was recently proposed by the Silk Commission. Now, that body could provide independent oversight and scrutiny of BBC outputs in Wales. But these are issues for my colleagues on the Communities Committee tomorrow to explore with Lord Hall and Lord Patten. So I'm just giving you warning, gentlemen. That's coming up. But tonight I'm very pleased to welcome you all here to celebrate the BBC's contribution to Welsh cultural life, particularly since the BBC Wales was created half a century ago. And BBC Wales has a very impressive list of productions since 1964 that include The Grand Slam, District Nurse, Doctor Who, and Sherlock, but to name a few. And I will share something with you. We get thousands of young children coming through the Assembly, and when they get bored, which can happen, you just mention, of course, Doctor Who was filmed here, and they are transfixed. So you're doing quite a lot for the Assembly and connecting with young people. But programmes such as Wales Today, Good Morning Wales, Post Cyntaf, Newyddion, and Week In and Week Out all now focal points of public policy and wider debate in Wales. Now, the importance of the role played by the BBC in the development of the creative industry sector in Wales over the last 50 years is commendable, and in particular the recent investment in the purpose-built drama studios at Roath Loch. So thank you to the BBC for the contribution that you make to Welsh life, and the latest of which will be an interesting series of programmes planned to mark the centenary of Dylan Thomas's birth. It is a very impressive CV, and one that is central to Wales's continued development into a modern, confident country. So I will remain a critical friend, but one who is supportive of your continued contribution to Welsh culture. Diolch yn fawr, and I would now like to invite Lord Bachan to speak.
Dame Rosemary, ladies and gentlemen, a friend of mine from Oxford was recently invited to go and give a lecture in Chicago. And he was aware as he went on that he was speaking for rather longer than the audience had anticipated and perhaps hoped. And he sat down to extremely tepid applause and turned apologetically to the chairman and said, he said, "I'm sorry about that. That was a real disaster, wasn't it?" And the chairman said to him, "Oh, I wouldn't worry about it." He said, Don't blame yourself." He said, "I blame whoever invited you." That underlines the importance of my not speaking for too long, particularly as the main point this evening is to hear the Director General, and to thank you, Dame Rosemary, for your hospitality. You said that it must be rare for Tony and I to find ourselves in the same room. Not so rare as you might think. We clocked in at a very nice hotel this evening, and they tried to put us in the same room. Now, I had two responses to that. The first is, on the one hand, it might please the Daily Mail to see how the BBC was driving down costs and expenses and becoming much more efficient. On the other hand, it may have encouraged the Daily Mail to write an article saying that Britain really was going to the dogs when the chairman of the trust and the Director General were in such a close relationship. So we did avoid that this evening. I'm delighted to have this opportunity, albeit very briefly, to say how important it is for us to be able to celebrate 50 years of BBC Wales. BBC Wales, which for those 5 decades has been seeking to reflect and report on the life, political, cultural, economic, and the vitality of Wales, and to do so in both languages. I think, to follow what Dame Rosemary said, that there is plainly a strong responsibility on us to understand our obligations of promoting civic humanism, of helping to promote democracy by properly reporting the political life of Wales, the national debate in Wales. It is perhaps a paradox that at precisely the moment when Welsh institutions have a greater role in democratic accountability, that on the whole, not many other people apart from the BBC are reflecting that in what they write or what they broadcast. It is curious, I think, that there is not more local and national reporting of what's happening, but it plainly puts a bigger responsibility on us. And it's not just a matter of dealing with what economists call market failure. It's a question of us recognizing our responsibilities as the British Broadcasting Corporation and reflecting the democratic life of the whole community. It's important for us to, as well, to reflect, as I said, the cultural life of Wales. I'm really pleased that we've established such a close relationship with S4C while respecting their editorial and operational independence. And I think one manifestation of that relationship has been the co-production of Hinterland, which I think will demonstrate what we can do successfully together. And I think that it's also very important for us to do all we can to promote the cultural institutions, the cultural industries in the community, which is why I welcome Roth Lock and all the network productions which are being made there. I think it's a terrific achievement. You talked about school children visiting the Assembly and being impressed by the fact that Doctor Who has visited the Assembly. It used to be my experience when I was at Westminster that you'd talk about the people on the front benches to parties of school children, and they would say Minister Who rather than Doctor Who. But that's probably an argument for more lessons in citizenship in our schools. I just want to say, make one footnote or two footnotes. First of all, the admonition about our failure fully to implement Professor Anthony King's very good report is well taken. I think we have improved, as a report by Cardiff University demonstrated a short while ago. We have got better, but we've still got a distance to travel, and that's very important for our College of Journalism and for the sort of lessons that we share with our large journalist community. And you also talked about trying to ensure that we have a proper way of representing Welsh views, Welsh opinion. I think we get pretty good advice from the Audience Council of Wales and from our wonderful Welsh National Trustee, Alan Closs-Stevens, who's not only never backwards in coming forwards and talking about Welsh issues, but also makes a big contribution on other issues that we discuss in the Trust, like the role of the World Service and the attempt to ensure that we have higher quality, more distinctive broadcasting. We're in the middle at the moment of doing what's called, it's a terrible phrase, a purpose remit of the BBC, surveying people's attitudes to the BBC. And it's not perhaps surprising that those who most value the quality of BBC programmes are also those who come closest to thinking that the BBC gives good value for money. And I think our best argument to our critics is the quality of the programmes, the television, the radio programmes, the online contribution that they make. I've said very often before that some of our critics, our most noisy critics, should be obliged to spend a week watching Fox television or the television in some of our European neighbours. I recommend Mr. Berlusconi's television channels in particular. The BBC isn't perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than virtually all the rest of the competition. Thank you very much indeed for allowing us to celebrate 50 years of working as part of this community, a community which owns the BBC. It's something we should never ever forget. And the best way of illustrating that before Tony Hall speaks to you is by showing you some of our product here, at which point the chairman of the BBC Trust is going to step smartly off the stage and you're going to see something much more interesting and good looking.
Isn't that brilliant? It's all about the programmes and the services. That's what makes us all do what we want to do. I have to say that it's wonderful to be here to celebrate 50 years of BBC Wales, BBC Cymru. There's also a very personal reason why it's wonderful to be here. At the end of my first week, I flew the TARDIS. I came to Roth Lock and I played, and Matt said to me, whatever you do, don't touch that little thing there, and I just for 1 nanosecond thought we might even take off. And I went home and my wife was saying, so it's another exhausting day at work, and I said, this is absolutely brilliant, flying a TARDIS. I was exhilarated by what I saw at Roth Lock. And then the next week, it began, the BBC, I remember, you know, crisis over Panorama, all the coverage we had to rethink over Baroness Thatcher's death and all of that, and back in the heart of it. But, you know, but that buzz you get from the kind of creativity you see around this organisation, that's always there, and that's what keeps you going in all these things. So I have been back in the BBC now for a year, well, actually a year tomorrow, and it has been exhilarating, well, mostly exhilarating. But to be given the right, to be funded by a license fee is a tremendous privilege. And the truth is that the people of Wales, as in every other part of the UK, make a very bold and a very generous commitment in paying for the BBC. They own it, they love it, they expect only the best from it. Every day, the BBC has to show that we're worthy of that commitment. I've returned to the BBC to find a Wales that is transformed. Looking back at that video, I was BBC's Director of News during those days in 1997 when the very idea of devolution in Wales was so hotly contested and divisive. And coming back now, I find Wales kind of exuding a self-confidence, a clear sense of itself and its own values, and an ambition that feels very, very different. But it's not just Wales that's changed. I've also come back to find a BBC Wales that to me seems transformed, truly transformed. It's remarkable that here in Cardiff, just a few hundred metres away from where I'm now standing, we now have a world-class powerhouse of drama production, a team that produces and oversees some of the BBC's most loved, most powerful shows, from Doctor Who to Sherlock from Atlantis to Casualty. You know, I remember some voices warning back then that the BBC was taking too much of a risk making Wales its home for drama, that the talent wasn't there, that perhaps the independent sector here was more suited to factual programme making rather than the things we wanted them to do, that it wouldn't be sustainable. Well, we all know, and it's a huge, hell of an achievement, that they were wrong, very wrong. As I said, the doubters were spectacularly wrong, and you don't have to take my word for it. Just go and ask Pinewood Studios, who are now setting up in Cardiff. Just go and ask Hartswood, the makers of Sherlock, Rondo, the makers of Indian Doctor, or Fiction Factory, the makers of Hinterland. There were also some here in Wales who quietly worried that once Wales hit some notional internal BBC quota for network production, there'd be a glass ceiling, a cap on a nation's creativity. Well, I tell you, it hasn't happened. Last year, Wales produced almost 7% of BBC UK television programming, far higher than its share of the population. That's an enormous achievement. That just isn't a terrific creative story. There's also a powerful economic benefit to that as well. It's an investment in Welsh network production worth almost £60 million every year, supporting hundreds of highly skilled jobs right across Wales. But the transformation I've seen in Wales is not just a story of net worth growth by the BBC, it's also about a renewed focus on serving Wales with vigour and imagination. Each and every week in Wales, more than 1 million viewers tune in to BBC Wales's television services for Wales, the highest figure in a decade. And that's a remarkable achievement, given the significant funding challenges that have faced BBC services here in Wales, and I want to say something more about that in a moment. In Radio Wales, we have a station that I believe has rediscovered its journalistic mission over recent years, and that commitment to quality and public service has been rewarded with its highest audiences in a decade. With Radio Cymru, BBC Wales have been candid enough to share publicly the challenges they've faced, socially and linguistically, and they've worked closely with Welsh language audiences to reshape and redefine the service. And I think that took honesty and bravery, but the right thing to do. But it's also a BBC Wales that is mapping its way through, a route through the digital thicket. When I was Director of News, we launched BBC Online onto an unsuspecting world. At that time, it provoked howls of angst from those who worried that it would deflect money from the much more serious business, as it was then put, of programme making. But I'm glad we ignored those people. And each week, BBC Wales online news and sport services attract almost 4 million browsers across a range of devices. But there's something else too in this story of transformation, a perceptible change of mindset within BBC Wales. What I see now and this is really important, is a deep-rooted commitment to partnership, to reaching out to organisations right across Wales. I think there's an innate understanding that we can often achieve more working with others than standing apart. And nowhere, I believe, is that more clearly defined than in the BBC's new partnership with S4C. After all the difficulties we faced at the time of the last licence fee settlement, it's striking to me how the two broadcasters have forged a remarkable new partnership based on trust and mutual respect. The success of the drama Hinterland, which I have to say I love on many, many counts, not least because the scenery is stunning, is perhaps the most striking example of this new alliance. A powerful example of two broadcasters working together to deliver an ambitious series for everyone. And I'm delighted that S4C and BBC Wales are now working together on a second series. Just 2 weeks ago, S4C also announced their plans to relocate with us at the new broadcast centre we're planning for Cardiff. And in a few months' time, we'll welcome S4C onto BBC iPlayer, the only independent channel to be a full part of the BBC's on-demand service. And I believe iPlayer is going to be the gateway to the BBC over the next decade. But S4C is not our only partner. The BBC's broadcast partnership with the Welsh Rugby Union is long-standing and ensures that pretty much every Welsh international can be enjoyed by everybody here in Wales. Just 2 weeks ago, the BBC and Arts Council Wales launched a new music scheme, Horizons, to help rocket boost the careers of some of Wales's most exciting new artists and bands. Looking to the future talent is so important. And again, just last week, I announced that the BBC was to become the broadcast partner for the amazing Hay Festival, a celebration of literature and ideas that's established a reputation right the way around the world. This new spirit of partnership is also shaping a major season of BBC programming to mark the anniversary of Dylan Thomas's birth. It's one of the most ambitious cultural projects ever undertaken by the BBC in Wales, rightly so. A moment to celebrate an extraordinary body of work by a mercurial man who left a global legacy. The season promises to live long in the memory. It includes an exciting reimagining of Undermilt Wood in partnership with National Theatre Wales, and a vivid account of Dylan Thomas's last days in the US, a poet in New York, produced by Modern TV here in Cardiff, and written by the peerless and brilliant Andrew Davis. In May, the BBC will be decamping to Larne Castle for 3 days of special events, discussions, programming and recordings, a poetic Glastonbury, if you like, that will bring BBC Wales and the BBC's UK networks together to celebrate the genius, the work of Dylan Thomas. The BBC has assembled an extraordinary array of talent for this celebration, and I'm delighted to say that one of Dylan Thomas's most passionate champions, President Jimmy Carter, will be joining a unique live transatlantic broadcast on May the 2nd between Radio Wales and WYNC, New York's public radio station. So let's have a look at some of the season's highlights. And it promises to be the most fantastic season. And in all these celebrations, we shouldn't forget one other point. And it's really important for any organisation, this one, which is it was the BBC, after all, that gave Dylan Thomas a platform and an income in the mid-1940s and commissioned many of his finest works. In fact, it was Rhodri's grandfather, an Aryan, that produced many of Dylan Thomas's most brilliant broadcasts. Just as importantly, though, it was the BBC here in Wales that chided and eventually convinced the BBC's London commissioners that here was a talent deserving of UK and international attention. It seems they needed some convincing too. They turned down quite early one morning twice before finally seeing sense. And that commitment to both nurturing and championing talent here in Wales, I think is something that still drives and must drive the BBC in Wales. And there are examples everywhere you look, in front of and behind the microphone. Now, because I really believe in the case for the BBC in Wales, there's also a danger of making an argument that appears complacent or rose-tinted, or even worse, arrogant. I say this because I'm acutely conscious that the BBC in Wales faces a disproportionate scale of responsibility, given the structural and economic challenges faced by the commercial media sector here. A few weeks ago, I argued that the BBC is just one part of the strongest media sectors in the world. I said Britain had the most vibrant and independent free press in the world. But standing here in Cardiff, thinking about the distinctive needs of Wales as a nation, I can understand that those words might sit rather awkwardly. The bald truth is that the UK media market, when looked at holistically, remains centralised in London and the southeast of England. Indeed, were it not for the efforts of the BBC over recent years, with developments like Salford or Rothlock, the picture might be even more serious. And I think this must give the BBC pause for thought as we prepare our plans for the new charter at the end of 2016. I've spent a lot of the last year visiting BBC centres around the UK, and I'm struck that the national and regional loyalties are intensifying. You know that. And whatever happens in Scotland, I believe the momentum will continue to build. In England, the development and growth of the major regional cities, coupled with an increasing sense of England as its own distinctive national space, are both developments that the BBC needs to grapple with and think through. But there are questions for us here in Wales too. Let me give one example. Despite BBC Wales's very real success, we must also acknowledge that English language programming from and for Wales has been in decline for almost a decade. The reduction in ITV Wales's contribution has played a part, but the BBC's output has also been eroded. What does that mean for audiences here? It means inevitably that there are some aspects of national life in Wales that are not sufficiently captured by the BBC's own television services in Wales, and I would include in that comedy, entertainment and culture in those sort of categories. Does this matter? Of course it does. The vitality of any nation must surely rest on more than its journalism. One cannot fully realize a nation's creative potential or harness its diverse talents through the vital, important, but also narrow prism of news. Now, this narrowing of output, of focus, was foreseeable, of course. Faced with budget cuts, BBC Wales rightly took the decision locally to prioritise and protect specific areas of national output, including news, current affairs and political coverage. And so, inevitably, other areas have felt the squeeze. Let me say, there aren't any easy solutions here, and our recent proposal to close BBC Three as a broadcast channel and move it online tell you something about the hard financial choices we're facing, but also the choices about where to find audiences that we're also facing. I do believe the BBC, we will need to think hard about how we strengthen our support for national and regional self-expression as we prepare our case for a new charter. And I would like to invite you all tonight to be a part of that debate when it starts. Because, let's never forget, no other public service in Wales is used quite the way the BBC is. Just imagine for a moment Wales without the BBC. Where would a nation find its voice in both its languages? Where would it be able to explore its identity, its geography, its people? How would a nation come together to share its common heritage, or debate its shared challenges, or celebrate its national successes? Just consider that every day the BBC is actively chosen by the Welsh people close to 7 million times. And every day, the average use of the BBC in Wales is over 6.5 hours per household. The highest, by the way, the highest level anywhere in the UK. But while I challenge anyone to find better value, I also challenge you tonight to tell us how we can continue to improve and deepen the service we offer the people of Wales. How we can continue to ensure that Wales can see itself and talk to itself on its own terms in a digital and interactive world. And how we can continue to take the very best talent produced and developed here in Wales and put it on a global stage. On BBC Wales's 50th anniversary, there is so much to celebrate, but there's also so much more still to do. Thank you for joining us here tonight. Thank you. Diolch.